Hi guys, how's it going? Good morning, Monday, week number 8, right? And per use, I'm gonna be sending you this video in a little bit. I'm also live on YouTube for some of you, and I'm gonna go over what you submitted already, what you need to submit by Sunday, and then we're going to talk about chapter 9, which is the organizational culture chapter. Okay, pretty interesting. Now, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go to our middle site, if possible, or maybe not. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. This is our Moodle site, and you submitted LO8 and also 2 LPs in about leadership, and then 2 PDOs. Pretty satisfied about the PDOs. I'm gonna start from the bottom. And I have already sent individual feedback to the groups. We're getting better every week, and that makes me really happy. Same about the LPs, some technical issues here and there, but you do understand what's going on. You are presenting the case and you are answering the question and use some of the material of the chapter. So I'm really proud of you. LO8, I have my notes here. The mean score, the average score is 73%, which is not high, or at least as high as I would expect. I don't know. I keep saying the same things every week, and I don't know why some of you keep maintaining the same patterns. So what I want to say again is, please study the PowerPoint slideshow before you start doing the LO. Okay, take your time. There's no time limit, so I don't see the point of you missing any questions or items. Okay, so take your time. All the information is there. Sometimes the language in the item may be tricky. Read it again. Spend some time, please. All right, that's all about feedback. Again, I've sent individual feedback about the LPs and the PDOs. Now, this week, week number 8, I'm going to be covering the organizational culture chapter. And for this Sunday, you have a LO 9. Okay. Nothing really fancy here or different. And 2 LPs and 2 PDOs. Okay. If you have any questions, guess what? Tomorrow, we have office hours from 8 to 12:30. Log in. Let me know what's up, and let's talk about it. All right. Let's talk about whatever you need to know early in the week. Okay. Don't wait until next Sunday, like 15 minutes before you submit it, please. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, or at least Moodle, and I'm going to go share the PowerPoint slideshow and start with chapter 9. Sport, organizational culture. Today, what we're gonna attempt is we're gonna try to explore the influence of the culture upon the organization. And we'll also try to examine why that culture is pivotal. We'll try to highlight its impact and explain how it can be diagnosed, okay? A lot of sub-themes. in general, you need to know that the examination of culture a lot of times is tricky. People are not like fans of it because it may create a tension, and sometimes it can be chronic. So it's not easy to talk about the identity, the strategic management, and the commercial outlook of an organization. Any kind of organization, not only sport organizations. Uh, However, in this class, we do think that the history and the tradition are associated with a sports culture, and they really need to be understood because there is no other way to reach an improvement in the performance. Okay, in sport has an impact locally and globally, and we need to figure out that impact and then find the roots. Okay. Now, is it important to know the culture? Well, think about your favorite team. Okay, any sport, football, basketball, the finals were last night. Any like hockey, baseball, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Think about the symbols. Think about the logos. Okay, what are they trying to communicate? Are those part of your favorite team's culture? Do you remember about the case of a specific team from Washington, right? But now they changed their logo and they actually changed their name as well, right? So a lot of people had an issue with the term Redskin. Okay, why? And some other people are like, well, this name or this logo is part of our culture. We cannot just change that. Also, you see a lot of values, and I wrote in this on this slide like that those are evident in culture, right? Are are we a team or any kind of organization that is interested in profit or just participating? Okay, do organizations who have think about profit and non-profit, for example. How are their cultures different and why? Okay, of course, with sports going into pro, especially the last 2 or 3 decades, there's a constant pressure to take values that we have like in other commercial businesses and try to apply them in sports. Okay, which makes sense. However, it is not that simple. We're going to explain it a little bit. Sports are not that simple. Even from our very first chapter, we talked about the unique characteristics of this industry, right? All right, so before we move any further, let's talk about culture and let's talk about definitions. Is there consensus over the terminology, like the definition of culture? No, no. Usually, the most common and kind of generic kind of definition is you have a group of people and those people share some values and some beliefs. So shared values and beliefs in a group of people. That can be a pretty generic definition of culture. Since there's no generally accepted, we can definitely see it in many different ways. However, again, for no matter how we see it, there are some assumptions that the majority agrees upon, right? First of all, as you can see, those are the 5 assumptions right here. The first one is that culture tends to be pretty inflexible and resistant too easy in rapid change. Okay. Number two has to do with people. Culture is shaped by circumstances, by the history of the organization, and by the actual people of the organization, the members, right? Culture is something that you can learn, and culture is something that you can share with other members of the organization, and is reflected on those common understandings and beliefs that we talked about. A lot of times, culture is unspoken. They're deep values, they're deep beliefs causing behaviors, but those beliefs are very well hidden from even the members of the organization. They're difficult to identify, okay? And the last one is about manifestation. So culture is manifested in a variety of ways that affect the performance of the organization and its members in also a variety of ways. So no matter how you define it or I define it, these are 5 assumptions that we generally agree upon. But for this chapter and this course, we're going to define culture as a collection of values or shared values, common beliefs and attitudes, right? And those 3 are going to set the norms and the standards within the organization, right? And so those 3, the values, the beliefs and the attitudes are setting the norms and the standards in the organization. And these are shared by the members of that organization. That's the definition we're going to be using, at least for this chapter and for our course. All right, so as I said before, the sports went pro. Okay, so there was a deep push to take the dimensions of culture that we applied in other organizations, in other business systems, as you see here, and apply them to sport. However, I hope you understand that it's pretty simplistic to do that, especially, we're in our 9th chapter now. So I'm sure you understand why the sport industry is different. So based on that, I hope you understand why it would be very simplistic, in a way, very naive, in a dangerous way, right? To assume that a sporting organization should adopt the methods of framing other business just the way they are. So they're like traditional systems without addressing the cultural variables. Okay. Also, on top of that, right? Yeah, okay. We cannot take whatever happens in other business systems and not really adjust them to the sporting field, okay, or the sporting industry. On top of that, all right, again, go back to your favorite team. Okay, now think about the team that you actually hate. Put your favorite team and the team you actually hate. Do you think they share a common culture? No, right? Also, think about some sports that have that those cultures that hardcore, no pain, no gain kind of culture that really reflect the behavior of the people who are participating in the sport. For example, football, right? And take a sport that is kind of softer, right? I don't know, let's say bowling or golf. No offense. Okay, I'm just talking about perceptions now. So not only, what I'm trying to say is that, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, that as a manager, you cannot take systems from business systems from other fields, just take them into sports and do not take into consideration the culture in sports, but also there are differences in cultures between organizations, between different sports. And on top of all that, there are are differences in the culture of organizations in the same sport. And that's why I said, think about your favorite team and then the team that you hate, or like the team that won the championship, LA Lakers, and some team that didn't even make the playoffs. Do they share a culture? Probably no. Okay, so as a manager, you need to remember that there are cultures and subcultures that make a huge difference, not only in the sport field, but in the actual sport organization and the unit that you are going to be running or managing. All right, let's talk about a different thing now. Sport culture is not the same as organized sport identity. Okay, here in identity, we're going to talk a lot about perceptions. So how do you perceive your own organization? That's self-perception, okay, right here. And then how others perceive your organization, okay? So we have athletes, student athletes in our class, okay? And it would be interesting to see, if we're in an actual classroom right now, ask them, how do you perceive your team? Do you think you're tough? Do you think you have, what kind of culture do you have in your team? And then ask people, other students, right, that are not student athletes or they're not participating in that specific team, to tell us about their perception of the team. And you see a lot of times there's discrepancy. So how individuals perceive themselves may be different to how others perceive those athletes or those organizations. A lot of times what we're trying to do is align these two, right? I'm going to give you a very simplistic example, but I hope it helps. So sometimes somebody comes to you and be like, hey, what's wrong, man? Right? And like, nothing, just tired, I guess. So some person may perceive your behavior at the time as offensive, or something is wrong, or maybe you're offended by whatever somebody else said, and you're just tired, or you're daydreaming, or you didn't sleep well, or something else is going on. A lot of times, our non-verbal communication will be perceived differently than what we want it to be. That's a very simplistic example. However, here, we want to align this to, we want to actually people perceive us the way we are. Okay. All right. So we talked about the identity, and I hope that makes sense. Now diagnosing. As I said, diagnosing is a process. Okay. So it is really, it's a long process. And let's say tomorrow you are the manager of a team, and in the beginning you're just trying to understand what's going on in the team. You need to observe people. You need to see how they react when they're winning, how they react when they're losing, how they react when the stakes are high, how they react when the stakes are low. So a lot of times organizational psychologists do that, right? When they're asked to figure out the culture of a sport organization, they just observe. And then sometimes they interview, right? And then sometimes they go around and give questionnaires. They're trying to understand how people react. And then they want to see them react, how they react while they're playing, while they're practicing, how they react when they're socializing, how they react with their families. So all this is some kind of information that when we're trying to diagnose the culture of sport organization is essential, but it takes time and is not easy. So let's say you collected that information. Now, a very difficult task is to interpret it. What does it mean? What does it really mean, right? And why would you care? How are you going to use all that information? So when we're doing a cultural diagnosis, so if we wanted to be useful, we need to seek to understand what drives that whatever behavior we just observed. So we need to just break it down and go towards the roots of the issue or the behavior. It may not be an issue, right? Um, and this is an example. Right here, we see different symptoms, and then how are we going to explain it, right? So how do people communicate during practice? What does head coach say when somebody is successful and when they're failing? What does the coach says to their star player when they're successful and when they're failing? All this shows something. How are the teammates supporting? So let's say, let me give you an example from football, right? Well, the kicker, kick goes in, last seconds. If he makes it, we'll win. If he doesn't make it, we'll lose. And he doesn't make it. Okay. As an organizational psychologist, I would be really interested in seeing how his teammates react, which ones react this way, which ones react the other way, how head coach reacts, how the other specialty coaches react, how the fans are reacting, how staff is reacting. All of this is a very important information for me to understand. To understand what? So to understand that behavior is just a manifestation of something deeper, a deeper value that I need in order to understand the culture of the organization. And here we have some examples about legends, heroes, logos, language, and so on and so forth. Now, the key question, of course, remain as to how to avert observations, how to relate those observations to deeper values. Okay, and as I said before, organizational psychologists love doing things like that, and usually they're trying to group them in dimensions. Okay, so here with table 9.2, we'll see some cultural dimensions. So we're trying to take those behaviors, group them, and put them in dimensions so we can understand the roots of whatever behavior we are observing. So here, first of all, the first dimension, stability versus changeability. Okay, so something happens. Are we very resistant to change, or are we ready to adjust? Okay, so we have 3 losses back to back to back, and the head of our favorite team, the head coach, will be replaced. What does it mean about the culture of the organization? Okay, it's not that easy to interpret, but what does it mean in terms of stability and changeability? Cooperation over conflict, something happens. Is the culture designed in a way to support cooperation more or conflict? Again, goal focus orientation, reward motivation, all the way down to time and planning, which is the culture again designed in a way to think more about short-term goals or long-term goals? Okay. Again, we take examples, we take behaviors, whatever we observe, and then we take them here and we group them in those dimensions, and we try and find the roots of whatever behaviors we observe and how these are, like how important are in the culture of the organization. We're trying to figure out. Okay, so another interesting way to think about culture here is through psychology. Psychology gives a great example, which is helpful because it's helpful to identify and interpret human behavior. So here we're using the analogy of the mind. And in more detail, we're talking about the conscious elements of the mind and the unconscious elements of the mind. So whatever we just observe, whatever is apparent, we say those are the elements of the conscious part. And that would be the physical environment, public statements of the officials, how, as I said before, staff or teammates or whoever communicates, the language you're using, and so on and so forth. Another example would be the heroes, right? And what kind of heroes do we have in this organization, and why? Why do we have this person and we don't have this person? What does it say? So of course, this, the heroes part and also the transitions part, goes a little bit deeper. It goes into the unconscious elements of the mind. And if you know basic stuff about psychology, you know that if we use this system, the unconscious is the one who drives the conscious part. Okay, so these are the deeper values of the culture. These are more of the manifestations of the culture. And now, what's interesting is, yes, okay, the heroes and the traditions will reflect the unconscious elements, but a lot of times what we observe as psychologists is that we say one thing and we do something different. So we say or we think we have this kind of values, but then based on what we did, we have different kind of values. And that's very interesting. These anomalies often represent a difference between espoused values and actual values. And that says a lot. That's a very interesting piece of information where you're trying to identify the culture of the organization. Okay. Right, I hope it makes sense so far. Okay, so what we're trying to map is not easy. It's really hard, and you start by just collecting all that information, and you're trying to see those patterns, and you try to see what's working, what's not working, and then identify those core values, beliefs, and attitudes, and maybe identify the need for some changes, and then try to challenge those values and shift from this to whatever, which is hard, which may create conflict, and also takes time, and of course, you need people to buy in and understand. So as a new coach, let's say you are in charge of a new team, and you go there, you don't like some of the shared attitudes in that team, right? You feel that there's a need for changing the culture. You think that will be easy? Nobody's. Nobody's. You may need to change a lot of things, including personnel, players, even things you put on the wall, the logos and the mottos and whatever was supported so far. Maybe you don't like it. Okay? So it is a process. And by that, we're done. These are the take-home points, and I'm going to read them as I'm always doing for you. Organizational culture has gained prominence as a concept useful in assessing and managing performance. The definition is the collection of fundamental values and attitudes that are common to members of a sport organization and which subsequently set the behavioral standards or norms for all members. What's the difficulty? Deep values common to organizational members are not easy to access. So, sport managers like yourselves can use cultural dimensions like the cultural maps. Once a thorough diagnosis has been completed, then you can work towards adapting and replacing undesirable cultural characteristics. All right, guys, that was it for today. Let me know if you have any questions. As I said before, we have office hours tomorrow from 8 to 12:30. In the meantime, lift intentionally, not habitually. Bye, guys. Have a great week.